Hi everybody, we're going to work through this diagram together. So go ahead and find this diagram and you will need a yellow colored pencil or crayon. You'll need a second color of some kind as well as a pencil. So we're going to start by kind of going through these boxes together so you can check that you understand how to fill out the diagram and that you understand what it all means. We're just going to focus on cellular respiration right now. And if you want to label this cell organelle, that's the mitochondria because that is where cellular respiration happens. And so we are going to look at the different chemical substances that come in and out of the mitochondria. And we're also going to look at how energy is transformed through cellular respiration. So when we look at this first checkbox here, there's 7 different terms. 4 of these are different forms of matter. We have chemical symbols given for those. And 3 of these are the different forms of energy that are involved in the processes we're going to discuss. So it turns out that the 4 circles or the 4 bubbles here relate to the 4 different chemical substances: carbon dioxide, glucose, water, and oxygen. So we have the chemical equation for cellular respiration up above, where the inputs are glucose and oxygen. And since these 2 arrows are going in, the 2 bottom arrows, that's where we would want to put glucose and oxygen. So we'll put glucose here. It doesn't actually matter which bubble you put them in. And I'm going to put the chemical formula as well, C6H12O6, glucose, sugar, as well as oxygen, which is O2. Those 2 things go into the mitochondria for cellular respiration. And then what comes out of cellular respiration is the carbon dioxide from the really broken down glucose molecule and water. And again, if you want to write the words in there, if that helps you, this one's carbon dioxide and this one is water. Okay, so we did that. We're going to look at our 3 forms of energy. It looks like here we just have 2 places to write energy. The energy that stays inside cells would be ATP, and the energy that's lost to the environment would be heat, and we're not going to talk about light today. Okay, so we have done that. That's the inputs and outputs of cellular respiration as well as the energy. Next, we're going to use yellow to shade in all of the shapes and arrows that represent the flow of energy. Because the thing with energy is that energy can be transformed, but as energy moves through a system, it ultimately all gets lost as heat, and heat is like this unusable form of energy. And so we won't see energy being recycled in the system. So obviously, first of all, ATP is a form of energy in this system, so we'll color that. Heat is a form of energy, so we'll color that, and I'll color the arrows for that. So when cellular respiration happens, cellular respiration is exothermic, and so it's releasing these 2 forms of energy. So now the question is, where did the energy come from to make the ATP and the heat? So if we kind of backtrack here on these arrows, we have 2 choices of where the energy came from glucose, which is sugar, or from oxygen. And the energy is always going to come from like the fuel, and we talked about combustion. So glucose is the fuel here. And so I'm going to color that yellow, and I'm also going to shade in this arrow. And so then I can see that flow of energy from glucose to ATP and heat. The mitochondria is transforming that energy through an exothermic chemical reaction. It now says to use a second color, and I'm going to use sort of like a magenta color. Use a second color to outline the 2 circles with the 2 carbon-containing compounds. And then we're going to use that same color to shade in the arrows that are part of the carbon cycle. So this task is to help us just remember that these 2 processes, photosynthesis and respiration, are part of the carbon cycle. We've seen them already when we talked about ecology, and to just emphasize that. So obviously carbon dioxide is carbon containing. So I'm just going to go ahead and circle that with my magenta color. And the other thing here that's carbon containing is the glucose. So I'm going to circle that. Part of why I like to emphasize this and help you remember this as kind of like a cycle between glucose and carbon dioxide is because so often we are taught to think that like plants give off oxygen and take in carbon dioxide. Animals take in oxygen and give off carbon dioxide. And that's just not an accurate picture of how these 2 processes are interrelated. Obviously, oxygen is being given out here, and carbon dioxide is being given out here, but I really do not want you to think of this as like a cycle between oxygen and carbon dioxide so much as thinking about it as a cycle between glucose and carbon dioxide as part of the carbon cycle. So it is sometimes useful to think about the relationship between oxygen and CO2 because both of those things are easy to measure. Like you can measure if oxygen is increasing or decreasing in a system. If you had like a plant in a jar, you could measure if CO2 was increasing or decreasing in the system. But in terms of thinking about the like ecological role of these processes, we want to think about it in terms of carbon cycling. So it says to shade the arrows. With this arrow, I'm actually going to outline it. This one coming from glucose, since we already shaded it yellow. But there we can basically see carbon going into the mitochondria in the form of sugar. And then once cellular respiration happens, that glucose molecule gets broken down into carbon dioxide molecules. And so then the mitochondria releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in the form of CO2. So we will again kind of come back to this when we do the second half of this diagram where we talk about photosynthesis. But this will hopefully help you see for cellular respiration how carbon is transformed from glucose to carbon dioxide. This diagram will help you to see the flow of energy from glucose to ATP and heat, as well as to remember the inputs of cellular respiration and the outputs of cellular respiration.